This video lecture comes from chapter 14 of my book, Computer Scripting Techniques with Python. Sequences here, chapter 14, sequences. Now, a sequence, there's a lot of learning objectives in this chapter. We're not going to cover everything. But mainly I want to talk about the differences between immutable and mutable sequences and show you some common operations on sequences. So let's open up a Visual Studio Code session and do some programming. Okay, so let me switch to my console. And I'm going to change my dev, cd dev.temp, make dir sequences code dot. All right. So now that I've got Visual Studio Code up and running, let me close that AI thing and create a new file. I'm going to create a main. And once again, I'm just going to demonstrate some fundamental concepts here. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a dot comment, and the dot comment is just simply going to say demonstrate sequences and operations. Okay. This will be the idiomatic, main, right? It'll be, you define a main method. And we'll start with pass. And then if name equals. This should be second nature to you. Main. So if we run this from the command line, then we want to call that main function. Okay. So now go back to the book here. There are essentially, what is a sequence anyway, right? Like a sequence is an ordered set of elements that can be accessed individually via a positive or negative integer index. A lot of folks who learn Python have no idea you can access index elements with negative integer indexes, but mostly I don't usually do that, but you can do it, right? And so for example, here we go. We'll start with a string variable. Of course, hello world, that's a very popular string, right? And in this case, a string can be considered a sequence because it's a sequence of characters, right? And you can treat it's an immutable sequence because you can't change a string once you create a string. You can only write over top of it. You can't change individual elements. That's why it's an immutable sequence. But each one of these characters is an element in the sequence. So for example, the H is element number 1, the E is element number 2, the L is element number 3, the second L is element number 4, so et cetera, right? And so now if you wanted to access that element, the H, the first element, you would index, for example, down here, you would index you would use a 0 to access the first element, or negative 12, okay? So note that to go from the number of positive indexes, or the value of the positive index values goes from 0 to length of the list, which is 12 minus 1. So 11 is the maximum positive integer, right? Then for the negative indexes, you can go negative 1, and that'll give you the same thing as 11 will. That's the 12th element, to negative 12. Okay, so that's how those indexes work. Like I say, I don't usually use negative indexes. I may not even demonstrate them, but they're there and they're in the book, right? Now, immutable versus mutable sequences, there's a list of common operations common to all sequences, right? So this is in section 1.3 in chapter 14. All right, so it's common sequence operations, right? So we can look for elements in a list. We can look for elements not in a list. We can concatenate two sequences. We can add a sequence to itself n number of times. So let's just create a sequence and see what some of the operations on it are, right? These will be, I guess I'll just demonstrate the most common. So let me select Visual Studio Code. Now I'm going to declare a string variable. And I'm going to say equals hello world. Like that. And then I want to print. The first thing I want to do is I can treat a string like an array or a list, right? Obviously. You just can't change each individual element, right? So a string, once again, to beat the dead horse, is immutable. You cannot change a string. But you can treat it as a sequence, right? So for example, if I want to print every character in that string variable individually to the console, I could just iterate over it like an ordinary list. Okay. So for char or C in string variable, okay. Then print C. I'm going to do a formatted string. I'll say F bracket escape C. Okay. And then what do I want to do here? I think what I'll do is I'll just print the string, but I'll print it on the same line, and I'll add a little bit of space. Allowed one space after each character. Okay, so that's what this will do. And then now when you do a print, right, this will print them on each line. Let me show you what I mean. So if I do this, this will print these on each line. Okay. So let me run this. This may or may not be what you want to do. Well, what I want to do is print them all on the same line, right? So I'm going to have to send something extra to this print function to tell it not to do a carries return when we print, okay? But right now I'm just going to save this file, go to my console and clear the screen, and then run the program, Python 3, and then main. All right, so it prints each character on a separate line, okay? But I want to print the characters on the same line. So we go back to Visual Studio Code, and we'll say, comma, endl equals, I think it's just like that. All right, so nothing. So let's go ahead and run this again. Main. There we go. CLS. Let me run it one more time up here. All right, so what was that magic trick? Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And we're setting the inline or the end to a string, which is a blank, like an empty string. So it's not doing a carriage return or a new line, right? And so that achieved the effect that I wanted. Now you can access elements of the string individually. So for example, you could say print, okay. Now after I've printed that, right, and I don't have any carriage return, I'm just going to do a print, and that'll print a carriage return. And then I'm going to say print F string, right, and then string variable, and then 0. Okay, so that will get me the first element of this string. So that's the 0th index. So now I'm going to run this code. CLS. And there's H. Okay. So if we go back to the text, some common operations on sequences. These are common to tuples. They're common to immutable sequences, and they're common to ordinary sequences, right? And there's quite a few. common operations. So if you learn the common operations, then you'll know how to handle essentially the basic operations on every sequence, right? So we're going to say the in. We're going to say, like, let's search for a character in this string. All right, so we're going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and we're going to print. Okay, and the expression is, let's do this. A string. We're going to see if this character is in. I'm going to say W in. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So W in string variable, right? Print W in string variable. Let's see if this works. All right, so let's go back to the text real fast and just check that syntax. So X in sequence returns true if item in sequence equals X, otherwise false. Okay, so we're going to go to the console and we're going to clear the screen and we're going to run it. And we get true because W is in that sequence. Now back to Visual Studio Code, and we're going to say, we'll just copy this line. Now notice it returned true. All right, let's see. We'll do print, and we'll pick a character. We'll say A in string variable. Let's see if it would have found lowercase w. Lowercase w in string variable, and then we're going to go A, uppercase for A, save, and we'll run these. Okay, go back to the console, clear the screen, run the program. So lowercase w is not in there, right? So if you're thinking, oh, I'm just looking for the W, it's looking for the, there's only an uppercase W in that string, right? So lowercase w, make sure that's the code, right? I don't want to give you any bum gouge. So yeah, the lowercase w is not in this sequence, okay? Now what we could do, when you're looking through a sequence and you just want to see if the absolute character is in that sequence, right? You can do something here. You could say dot upper, right? And we could say dot upper. Dot upper. Right. Now also too, we're just converting everything to uppercase in the string. Now this is a temporary. Remember, a string cannot be modified. All right. Now this is not a built-in function. This is a function on string objects in particular, or it's actually a method in this case because it works on the string object. And what it does is it converts that string. It doesn't convert the string. It takes the string and creates a new string with all the characters in uppercase, right? So if I really wanted to compare apples to oranges, I would do something like this. Upper. Now that's going to look a little weird because this is a string. It's a string literal. But I want to make sure that I'm comparing apples to oranges. Apples to apples, not apples to oranges, right? So dot upper. So I'm going to compare everything. I'm going to make sure that, okay, here's the character I'm looking for. Now, if you really did want to make sure that, oh, I just want to make sure the uppercase is in there and the lowercase isn't, that's great. Just be aware of what operation you're doing, right? So now I should get a yes, or true, a true, and a false. Okay. So save that and then come over here and clear the screen and run that code. So a true, and a false. So that is basic operation. That's one. That's in, right? Let's go back to the text. I'm not going to demonstrate every one of these, right? I just want to kind of point you in the right direction so that you can see, like, All right, so then sequence, we can add, we can concatenate, right? This plus operator is overloaded to concatenate sequences. We can multiply sequences together. We can access each element. We can return a slice. This is quite helpful. We can return a slice of the list. We can start with like the start element and then go to the jth element, right? So let's say I wanted to return a piece of this sequence. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and I wanted to print. So the string has not been modified. The string is still exactly this, right? These uppercase just returns a copy of the string. So now if I want to print F string, right? F formatted string, and then do, I don't necessarily need to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then say string, variable, and get rid of that. And then do, we're going to say we're going to go 0:5. All right. And we're going to see what that results in. Control save. Go back to the console and run the code. Clear the screen first. Hello. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it cuts it off right here. So what we could do is we could, to test that, we can say if we're going to go to the 0 to element 5, let's see what it says in the text. So return slice of the sequence from I to J. I think it stops at right before J. So this is the way it works, right? So we go back. Remember, everything is 0 index on the positive, for the positive indexers. I'm going to go back here. If I say 0 through 5, I'm talking about 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So technically that's 6 characters, but I think this might only return. So let's do this. We're going to print. I'm going to send two things. I'm going to say, I'm going to return the string, and then I'm going to have another, I'm going to say length of slice is, and then another curly brace, and I'm going to say length, L-E-N, and then I'm going to just copy this and paste it in this length function. That the length, remember, is a built-in. Now we're going to run the code. So what this is going to do is going to print hello, and then we're going to say length of slice is, and it's going to say, oh, how many characters are in that slice, right? And that'll tell you what this I and J does exactly. So let's go back to the terminal, clear the screen, run it. So it's 5, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Technically, it looks like it's 6 chars, but what it does, it returns everything up to right before the 5th element. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is 5 chars. So that's the length of hello, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, now let's go back to Visual Studio. Let's go back to the text. All right, that is immutable sequences, essentially, right? I'm not going to go through all these. But now let's talk about regular sequences, okay? So in chapter 14 sequences, we've just learned that there are 2 types of sequences: immutable sequences and mutable sequences. And the strings, as we've just seen, are immutable, okay? And the book goes into more detail on immutable sequences, okay? and the common operations on the string. So it demonstrates, and there's a repository for this course, which is in the syllabus, and I'll post it in a link down below. Okay, we've just saw how to access individual characters. So now let's talk about mutable sequences. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to get rid of this. And I'm going to, so the way that you'd normally define a list is there's a couple different ways, right? I'm going to say like student names. Let's say I wanted to have a list of student names equals, right? Now, this is an empty list. So if you want to create a list with nothing in it, you create it with 2 square brackets, right? You could also add individual elements. You could pre-populate the list. You could say, you could use string literals like Tom, Sapna, okay, Sally, right? So this would create a list of student names with 3 student names in it, right? Generally speaking, when I create a list, I will create it with the empty list, right? And then if I want to add a student name, then I will use the append function, right? So for example, I could say student names dot append, and then give it a name, right? Rick. Now, just because you have a list here that says student names, Python does not care 1 iota what type of an object you put in the list, right? You could say student names. This is where your discipline has to come in. You could put in 12. You could put a numeric value in there if you wanted to, right? Now let's see what this would look like, right? If I iterated over this list, I could say for S in student list, student names, print S, right? I'm just going to do a real simple print here. Now I'm going to run this, and we're going to say Rick 12, right, on each individual line. So let's go to the terminal, clear the screen, run the code, and we get Rick and 12. So Python will store anything in a list, right? Any type, any whatever. And so you really have to kind of pay attention to what items or what types of objects you're putting in your list. I think with great freedom and flexibility comes great responsibility on the side of the programmer. I've never had a problem, right? Just to say this, right? I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that you can put any type of an object in a list, right, in Python. Have I ever had that a problem for me during my programming? I've programmed a lot of complex stuff in Python. No, right? Because as the programmer, you are responsible for what your code does, right? So I'm aware of what I'm doing with the code that I'm creating, and so I've never had an issue, right? But it's just something to be aware of. Now, so back to, now the difference between, let's go back to the code, right? Let's go up here and just say, get rid of the student name stuff. And I'm just going to say, char list. Char list equals, and I'm going to initialize this list kind of like with the same set of chars. H, right? E, L, L, O, hello, space, Oops. I still need a comma. I need a space. There's a space. W O R, oops, L D. So hello world, and then exclamation point. Now, if I print this out, I'd have to do something like this. I would say 4. This isn't exactly equivalent to a string, right? A string is all like compacted together. So for S in, or for C in Charles, and the C doesn't matter. You can name it Sally, for all you cared, right? So for C in Charles, right? Then print format a string. It doesn't really matter there. I'm just going to say C, comma, and then indel. Okay, indel equals, okay, indel equals like that. Let me do this print. I'll do it with the formatted string. C and comma and end equals like that. Okay. So I'm just going to print each character, no space, right? And then when I'm done with all this, I'm going to say print to do a carriage return. So let's run this and see what it looks like. Clear the screen. So we get hello world. We don't get any space, right? Because there is no space. Let's go back and I'll show you what I mean there by there's no space. I added that empty string, but I needed to put a space there, right? So now when I print this out, we got hello world, right? So, you know, from the string standpoint, it technically it looks exactly the same, right? But now I have a sequence that has modifiable, right? I have modifiable elements for each of those things, right? So now I can go back to the Visual Studio Code, and let's say I wanted to change, right, one of these characters in this char list, right? I could say char list 0, right? So I'm going to change H to A. Hello world, right? And then I'm going to repeat this and just print out the list again of characters. Save. And come over here, clear the screen, run the program. So the difference between a string and a list of characters is the list, each element within a list is modifiable, right? And it doesn't really matter what's in that list. You can modify a list of anything as long as it's a regular list or sequence, right? But strings are immutable, so you can't change a string. Okay, string is a special type of sequence called an immutable sequence. And let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Now, generally speaking, when you create a list, like I say, I don't generally populate my lists this way. I do it by creating an empty list, right? So sum list equals like that, right? So there's my empty list, and then I'll do something, and along the way, I'll say sum list dot append, right? And I'll append whatever object I'm appending to the list, like Rick, okay? Sum list, okay? APPEND. Katerina. All right. Andy. All right. So here I've just added 3 names to the list, and then if I want to print these names out, I go for name, right? Or for element, right? E in some list. Now this is the reason we can do this, right? If you come from another language like, let's say, C# or Java, this is the Pythonic way to iterate over a list, right? So these lists have built-in iterators, okay? If you see somebody doing this, right, for I in range length 0 through length, len, some list, right? Print some list I. All right. So what we're doing here is we're saying from 0 to whatever the length of the list is, right? Some list, print I. We'll see if this works, right? Now let's save that and let's go to the console. CLS. So we printed the list, right? Rick and Katerina. Oh, I think I misspelled that name. Let me go back there and fix that. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. I can't have this. I can't have that atrocity. Katerina. All right. But if you see something like this, right, or if you come from another language like C, where C, the syntax in C would be like this, right? For int I equals 0, I less than, let's say, some list length. Whatever, right? I plus plus. This is like an idiomatic sequence, right? It's not valid Python, right? So I'm not going to leave it in there. But this is a telltale sign that you come from another language and you're iterating. There's another way of doing kind of the same thing, but in a more Pythonic way. But generally speaking, when you want to step through the elements of a list, you just say for, whatever name. So you declare a variable like E or element for element in some list, and then it is element, print element. Or in this case, we have names in there, but the name of the list is some list, right? It doesn't really matter what that list name is. Element. And don't forget your colon. Now, okay, so we've saved this. So let's go to the console, clear the screen, and run it one more time, make sure everything's good. So of course we can change the element, right? Because it's a mutable list, right? So we go back to Visual Studio Code. When we change our mind, we can say some list 1. That'll be the second element equals Stewart. Okay. And then rerun this code to step through that list. And let's print that out. Save. Go to the console. Clear the screen. There we go. Rick, Stewart, Andy. So that's an immutable list, right? I mean, that's a mutable list, right? You can add elements to the list, change elements, right? Step through each one. Now, this list, some list, is made up of strings, right? So that's a string. So this is a list of strings. So Rick, it starts off with Rick, Katerina, Andy, and then I can replace the second element, right, with Stewart, so I've replaced that second string, but I cannot modify the individual strings on that list, right? That's still no. So I couldn't say list 1 0, but I can access it because this is essentially a two-dimensional list in many ways, right? So we have a list, which is one dimension, and then we have individual elements or strings, and each of these strings have a length, right? So for example, Katerina has a length, Rick has a length of 4, Katerina has a length of 8, Andy has a length of 4, Stuart has a list of 7. So now if I wanted to print out, for example, 4, I'm just going to repeat this, right? Because I can repeat this element because it's this element declaration is local to this for loop, right? So for element in some list, print, okay, element. So I'm printing the string, and then I'll say 0. So I want to print the first character of each element in that list, right? Now if this is not a list of strings, then this would probably fail, right? But this should work, so I'm going to do this. Clear the screen. Run the code. Yeah, so we printed RSA, right, for the first letters of each of those strings, right? So that essentially is lists in a nutshell, right? Primary, and I don't want to make this video much longer because it's really just an intro. We have immutable lists, which are strings. We have mutable lists, which are ordinary sequences, right? Everything's a sequence. There's common operations on sequences. Okay, so if you know how to search a string, right, then you can search any list, right, for whatever you're doing. There are tuples. This is how you create a list. I just showed you how to do this. List comprehensions, I'm not going to talk about that in this video, but maybe in a later video. Anything that a list comprehension can be quite obfuscated if you're not used to the syntax. So personally, I stay away from list comprehensions unless it's the absolute best way to do something, right? I rarely find that to be the case. All right. But lists come up everywhere. Like when you're in database programming, you have a list. When you get a set of return results from a query in a database table, that's a list of rows, right? So understanding how to process lists is very handy. Now the other type of list is a tuple, which is also immutable, right? You can access tuples like a list. And I'm not going to cover that in this particular video. But anyway, that is all I wanted to talk about, and I hope everyone found this helpful.